Hi, I'm Michelle the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to take the BS out of IBS and of course to wish you a happy new year and a happy Veganuary for everybody that's taking part. Now today's video is for those people that want to eat more plants without sending their IBS symptoms through the roof, and I've got 5 top tips to help you do just that. Let's get into it. So before we get into the tips, I just want to give you a little bit of background to this video. Now if you've been here for a little while, you may already know that back in 2015 I went from eating a really meat, fish and dairy heavy diet straight to vegan, and let me tell you, I suffered for it. Way before I'd had my IBS diagnosis or had ever heard of a low FODMAP diet, I swapped the meat for beans and nuts. I started drinking huge fruit and fibre packed smoothies, and I was cramming in as much salad and vegetables at every meal as I could manage. And over the next 18 months, my IBS went through the roof. And all of that extra fibre, fruits, vegetables, raw, cooked, nuts, seeds, legumes, all of that, although they're perfectly healthy, they're perfectly delicious and absolutely nutritious for you, it was all just a bit too much for my IBS and for my gut to handle all at once. And in some ways I'm really grateful for that experience, because it's ultimately what led me to seek medical attention for my condition, to rule out any of those pesky underlying factors, and what led me to the low FODMAP diet. But it's really not the way that I recommend that you go about getting a diagnosis or by beginning your veggie, vegan or plant-based journey. So 2021 is my 6-year veganiversary, and I honestly cannot imagine ever going back to my old way of eating. But for those of us that do suffer with chronic gut issues, it can take a little bit of time and tweaking to get things right. And unfortunately, for those of us with IBS that do want to try eating more plants in our diet, most of the foods that we would rely on, beans, lentils, peas, soy products and meat replacements, they're all either really high FODMAP or they only have really small, safe, tolerated serving sizes. So before I put you off completely, I really just wanted to say that eating more veggies and maintaining a happy gut is not an impossible task. And in fact, over the years I've heard from lots of people who actually feel that including more plant-based meals into the diet was actually helpful to their gut symptoms. So hopefully some of the tips I'm going to share with you today are going to get you started off on the right foot. And with all that being said, I'm imagining that you can probably guess what tip number 1 is going to be. So tip number 1 is to start slow. Now, despite what your FOMO or the clever marketing around Veganuary is telling you, you really don't need to get all of this perfected before the end of January. If including more plant-based meals is something that you're really committed to trying, then starting off slowly is really going to be the best way for you and your gut. There's really nothing worse than going all in, flaring up your symptoms, and then either feeling like a failure, giving up, or even worse, shouting from the rooftops that a vegan diet is terrible and that you almost died because you ate vegetables. So to make this a long-term, sustainable and achievable goal, just start small, maybe with a few meals a week or even 1 meal a day. Try sticking to some tried and tested recipes that you know that you tolerate really well, but just play around and experiment with switching out the animal protein for a veggie protein. And just getting a few really small habits that you know are easy to do day after day after day is something that you can then build on week after week and month after month. So by just gradually increasing things like your fibre, your nuts, seeds, beans and legumes, and playing around with swapping in and out your animal proteins for veggie proteins, hopefully it's going to give you time to get used to things, it gives your taste buds time to adapt, and most importantly, it gives your gut time to get used to this new way of eating. So tip number 2 is to begin by swapping out the ingredients that matter to you the least. Now, if you're a self-confessed cheese addict and you put it on absolutely everything, don't make cheese be the first thing that you attempt to give up. Instead, choose one or two other things that you eat fairly often, but you don't have a really strong love or a really strong opinion about either way. So for example, when I went vegan and the rest of my household were still eating their usual diet, together we tried vegan breakfast sausages, we swapped to a plant-based butter and to milk alternatives. And those swaps were fairly easy for everybody to make without it being a big issue. And I'm really thrilled to say that my husband has now been vegetarian for over 3 years, and with the exception of the odd egg and cheese, he pretty much now eats a totally vegan diet. But I'm absolutely certain that if I'd have thrown tofu and kale smoothies at him from day one, he would have probably been really reluctant and almost put up a barrier to any change in the future. So you really want to start with those things that matter to you the least and the things that are going to make the least difference when you swap them out. And by being able to make these small swaps where you don't really notice or care about the difference, you're going to feel like you're taking action, and it's really going to motivate you to start taking bigger and bolder switches and to experiment with more new things. Tip number 3 is don't automatically rule out foods that you can't eat in large portions. Now, if you've attempted to introduce more plant-based foods into your diet in the past, or you've just really been paying attention to the types of things that flare you up, then it's easy to start thinking that there are certain foods or even whole categories of foods that you can't eat because you feel like you can't manage a regular portion. Now, this is something that I see a lot on the low FODMAP diet, where people cut out entire food groups and lots of things just because they feel like they can't eat a full or what they would previously consider a normal sized portion. When in reality, if they were maybe just a little bit more conservative with the portion sizes and maybe spread those ingredients out over the course of a week rather than eating them for breakfast, dinner and tea, they might be pleasantly surprised by how well they actually tolerate them in smaller, more sensible amounts. Now, this particularly applies to things such as legumes, nuts, seeds, fruit and sulphurous veggies such as cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower and broccoli. It might be that for you a huge multi-fruit smoothie is an absolute no-no, but if you just switch things up and you used one portion of strawberries, a small portion of coconut yogurt and some oats, it might be absolutely fine. And of course, this is going to be different for everybody, but playing around with your portion sizes and the frequency that you eat in certain foods is going to be one of the best ways that you can get the most variety into your diet whilst keeping your gut symptoms under control. Tip number 4 is to experiment in the kitchen, and you might be pleasantly surprised to realise just how much the preparation and cooking methods can make a difference, not only on how well you tolerate something, but how much you enjoy it and how you can see yourself incorporating it into recipes in the future. Let's take something such as beans and lentils. Lots of people with gut problems think that they can't tolerate them because they've only ever had the dried versions cooked from scratch at home. The chances are, if you switch to canned varieties and you rinse them really well before using them, you may be able to tolerate them much better than you ever imagined. And if canned beans are not your thing, then some simple swaps such as making sure you soak the beans for 24 hours, cooking the beans really thoroughly before you incorporate them into the recipe, or even sprouting the beans can really make a difference to whether you tolerate them or whether you don't. I hear from a lot of people who struggle with raw fresh vegetables and salads. Now, winter is the perfect time for experimenting with some warmer salads and incorporating some cooked ingredients such as roasted carrots, radish, bell peppers, tomatoes, fennel and even spring onion greens. And all of those things, when you combine them with items such as cucumber, rocket and even certain lettuces such as romaine or baby gem lettuces, are absolutely fabulous when you briefly cook them into a stir fry or add them to some kind of noodle dish. Now, fermenting veggies such as cabbage into a sauerkraut is something that you can do really easily at home with minimal equipment. And not only is it a way to help you incorporate some of the hardier, more sulphurous vegetables into your diet, but fermented foods are really great at boosting the good bacteria in your gut. Now, don't forget that for the majority of fruit and veg, the bulk of that pesky fibre, which is what can tend to irritate the digestive system, is actually in the peel. So something as simple as peeling it can have an effect. And to help your digestion along a little bit more, try breaking down the foods into the smallest possible amounts. So grating them, chopping them really finely, pulsing them in a food processor, and don't forget that you can always whiz things up into soup, sauces and smoothies, stewing or even pressure cooking to break them down as much as possible before they even hit the stomach. A big tip for this as well is to also make sure that you're chewing really thoroughly, so you're not leaving all that hard work up to the digestive system. And I can't talk about vegan food prep and cooking methods without touching on the topic of tofu. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, after a few dodgy experiences with bland tofu in the past, I never ever touched the stuff until I started a low FODMAP diet, and I suddenly realised that the meat alternatives that I'd been relying on all contained onion and garlic, so they were completely out. So I really needed to then start experimenting with tofu, with the cooking methods that I used, to really get myself a taste for it. And now I can honestly eat it straight out of the packet, but it really did take some time and some experimenting to get used to it, for my taste buds to adjust and to find the brands and the cooking methods that really suited me and what I was looking for from the tofu to use it in recipes. So some quick tips for cooking tofu are to choose the firm or the extra firm varieties. If you can find it, then the smoked versions are really great, especially when you're first starting to use it, because a lot of the hard work of getting all that flavour into the tofu has already been done for you. You also always need to make sure that you squeeze out of as much of the water as possible. And to help you do this even more, you can actually freeze the tofu first. This is going to help you to squeeze a lot more of the water out, and it gives it a much firmer, meatier texture. Another way that I really like to eat tofu is to grate it really finely, and then that can be added into fried rice dishes, into soups, into stews. You also need to be making sure that you're throwing as much flavour at it as possible, and if you can, to marinate at least for a couple of hours before you start the cooking process. And please let me know in the comments below if you would like a whole video dedicated to cooking tofu that doesn't suck. And finally, to tip number 5, which is farting is natural. Everybody does it, whether they admit to it or not. Most people fart between 12 to 24 times a day, and the release of gas from your body is a sign of a perfectly healthy, normal digestive system. I just think that sometimes our expectations of what we're prepared to tolerate are a little bit unrealistic. Now, you can't really expect to make significant changes to your diet without seeing some knock-on effects for your digestion. So when you do start to increase things such as fibre, nuts, seeds, fruits, sulphurous vegetables, beans, legumes, lentils, all those kind of things, you are probably going to notice a difference to your digestion. Now, this can be things such as an increase in farting, a change to the smell of your farts, definitely more frequent regular stools, more bulk to your stools, and possibly even some undigested plant material and fibres in there that you may not be used to seeing. You may get some bouts of bloating, and you could even experience things like trapped wind or mild cramping sensations if you've overdone it to begin with. Now, all of these changes are usually temporary for most people and will often settle down once you get used to the new diet or you've made some tweaks and changes to suit. So unless these symptoms get really bad to the point where they're affecting your day-to-day life and you really don't feel that you can cope with them, then usually there's nothing to worry about. And as I always say, it's better out than in. But of course, if you do experience any significant changes to your weight, your overall health, or your digestion, then you should always speak to a medical professional. But other than that, you're usually good to go. So there you have it. Have any of these tips encouraged you to eat more veggies in your diet this year? Please leave your own tips and any Veganuary, vegan or IBS questions that you've got for me in the comments below, and as always I'll do my best to answer them as honestly and as fully as possible. And if you need recipe ideas and lots more tips and tricks for how to incorporate more veggies into your diet if you're suffering with IBS or if you're eating low FODMAP, then make sure you hit the subscribe button below and the notification bell so that you never miss a post. Until next time, keep eating those veggies and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.